The Named Persons Scheme, passed by Holyrood in 2014, it's among the most controversial policies of the 9-year SNP government. Its rollout across Scotland was halted after the UK Supreme Court ruled that data sharing provisions were unlawful. Today, the Deputy First Minister told MSPs he now hopes to implement an amended scheme in August 2017, a year later than planned. Here's Scotland Tonight's James Chain.
I am an unapologetic advocate of getting it right for every child.
This policy has lost the confidence of many Scottish families.
Could the Deputy First Minister tell us if he believes that the Scottish Government made a mistake?
It's an emotive subject, perhaps because it goes right to the heart of protecting Scotland's children. The Named Persons Scheme would nominate individuals to oversee the welfare of each and every one of them. It's already been used in 5 council areas. The named person would usually be a health visitor, a head teacher, deputy head or other professional, depending on the age of the child. They'd already be involved in the child's life when they took up the role. They'd be a single point of contact, giving the child advice or helping the family access services, even just being somebody to talk to. Every child would have a named person, from birth to 18 years old. Its national implementation is now delayed until August 2017. That's because of this ruling in the Supreme Court in London. It said that some parts of the legislation breach the rights to privacy and a family life under the European Convention on Human Rights. Deputy First Minister John Swinney now says he'll focus intently on that key aspect of sharing information about children and families.
For that reason, the Scottish Government will undertake a 3-month period of intense engagement in Scotland. We will take input from practitioners, as well as parents, charities, as well as young people, those who support the named person policy and those who have concerns about it.
The Scottish Conservatives insist there are wider problems with the scheme.
Could the Deputy First Minister tell us if he believes that the Scottish Government made a mistake by making a move away from the term welfare, which can be defined in statutory terms, to the term well-being, which has no clear definition and which as a result has lowered the possible threshold of intervention from at significant risk of harm to any minor concern about the child?
Scottish Labour offer broad support, but they want part of the plan reined in.
We have suggested that we use the opportunity of this pause to remove 16 and 17-year-olds from the scope of the policy. To include them was a mistake.
Beyond the political points raised this afternoon, there's a long list of concerns put forward by family groups and campaigners. But the Scottish Government say it's a key part of their plan to make Scotland the best place in the world for children to grow up. And they're vowing to press ahead.
Well, we debated the Named Person Scheme with the Director of Barnardo Scotland, Martin Crewe, and the campaigner and former social worker, Maggie Mellon. Maggie Mellon, you've campaigned hard against this scheme. What's your reaction to the national rollout being delayed by a year?
Well, I felt nothing but relief, really, when the Supreme Court ruling came out, and it was clear from that that the scheme, as enacted and as being practised, in fact, in Scotland currently, could not go ahead. But after hearing the Deputy First Minister's statement today, and other statements following the ruling, I'm worried again. It seems to me that there's a huge gap between the rhetoric and the reality about the scheme.
Martin, Parliament passed this measure in 2014, but it won't be rolled out until at least 2017. So obviously it's still a lot of work to do to make this fit for purpose.
Yes, and I think the Supreme Court ruling has forced us to give a bit more time and thought to the legislation, but I would have hoped that Maggie and others who have campaigned with good intent to review the law would see this as a positive, particularly as John Swinney announced that today that for the next 3 months there would be a period of intense engagement where he'd go out of his way to listen both to those who were in broad agreement, but also some of the more critical voices.
OK, Maggie, are you not reassured by that? What are your concerns?
I'd really like to be reassured, and I have to say that I think many of the people who were in favour of the scheme had good intentions. But I do think the government really has mixed up good intentions with good government. And I'm still concerned that today John Swinney was saying that the scheme was overall had a beneficial impact and that councils should carry on practising it. Now, the guidance around the scheme is quite clearly for quite mass information sharing about any concern about children's lives. It's if the rhetoric that this was all about giving parents and families a point of contact within services to make them get the right service, that there would be no problem. But in fact, they've created a scheme that's a point of contact about parents. It's about assessing parents. It's about suspicion of parents, I think, which is now deeply embedded in services. So I hope the Deputy First Minister will be listening to those concerns.
Martin, can you address those concerns?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where this view that it's going to involve mass information sharing has come from, because actually, as I've said numerous times, for the majority of parents, this will make no difference whatsoever, because the named person is already an existing professional who's working with them, either a health visitor or a teacher. And actually, these are trusted professionals, and the named person for most parents will make no difference.
Well, Martin, in that case, why does every child have to be included in this? Why not just children that are seen to be vulnerable?
Well, the simple reason is that children don't come with a convenient label which says, I'm vulnerable. What we know from universal services is that you can pick up the need where it occurs. The GP service doesn't have a doctor who comes and knocks on your door and says, are you well or not? That's exactly what the named person is intended to do. It's a responsive service.
Maggie, do you agree with that in principle then?
Well, no, that's what was being said about it. But in fact, it's part of a view that where government actually seems to think it should have a direct relationship and a direct control of children's lives, and that parents are merely a means to kind of deliver that. Now, the state makes a lousy parent. It's children who are currently in care who really need us to get it right for them. They have some of the worst outcomes, and Scotland, contrary to what John Swinney said today, Scotland actually has the highest rate in the UK of children coming into care, as in coming into being looked after and accommodated. We actually have fewer children than we used to have being supported at home. So this hasn't been a preventative measure, or it's a misunderstanding of prevention. And I think it mixes up need, where there's families in huge need, but this scheme mixes up need and risk, and all we have is a risk assessment framework that actually the most vulnerable children and the families in greatest need are not having their needs met and addressed by this.
Martin, does this misinterpret need and risk?
I don't think so. I mean, Maggie's right to focus on those most in need, but the reality is that looked after children and those in the child protection system are a fraction of 1% of the child population. But what we know is that there's a much larger number of children who have all sorts of challenges and adversities in their life who actually could do with some extra help, and that's what the named person is about.
Martin, what exactly does the named person do then? I have 2 teenage daughters. Can you tell me how the named person would interact with me and my children?
Well, in all likelihood, you wouldn't have any contact at all. If there was a concern that could have come from you or from somebody else talking to them, then the named person would talk to you about it and say, is there advice and support that you need? The bit that's been misinterpreted is the compulsory nature of the scheme. It's a universal scheme, which means it applies to everybody. But at the point that you were advised about what your daughters might benefit from, you could say, no, I'm not interested in that advice.
But will the named person have access to school records, to health records?
If necessary, they will have access to appropriate records. But in terms of the information sharing, one of the things to remember is that what we're talking about is essentially professionals now have to make judgments about when and when not to share information. That discretion still applies.
Okay.
This isn't a great raft of new information sharing arrangements.
Maggie, what's your response to that? It's already in existence, this information sharing.
No, information sharing is only in existence in relation to children at risk of significant harm. That means you need a good reason to write down stuff about children and their families. So that's what the Supreme Court said, and that's what the government needs to get right. Now, Martin has said, well, nothing's changing, everything's the same, in which case, why have we had the law? There must be a reason that that law was enacted. I would ask, can any named person get a hot dinner for a child or a pair of shoes for a child if the parent or the child is in need? That's not what I'm seeing, and that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that it's a system of actually trying to regulate family life almost.
Okay.
And families do the job better
let Martin come in there.
Does.
Regulating family life.
Well, I can tell you precisely why it became law, because I can remember it's almost exactly 4 years ago that Aileen Campbell, the then Minister for Children and Young People, came to the Getting It Right for Every Child programme board, which I was chairing at the time, and said the reason we need legislation is because the rollout of Getting It Right for Every Child is not consistent enough and it's not happening fast enough. And that was the reason why the government decided to legislate.
Martin, the government says they want to roll this out in 2017. Is this realistic?
I think what needs to be done before August 2017 is that we do have to have a review to make sure we're getting the parameters right. We do have to make sure the legislation is tighter. That's clearly what the Supreme Court has said, that around information sharing there is work to do. And then, crucially, we need to get it out to practitioners and to parents to say, this is what's actually coming down the line. In the meantime, we carry on with implementing the non-legislative version. OK,
and Maggie, you'll continue your campaign?
Absolutely, because the non-legislative version is operating on what the Supreme Court ruled was an unlawful basis in terms of the information sharing. So that's the one thing I would caution against now.
Maggie Mellon and Martin Crewe, thank you for joining us this evening.